You count on Native America Calling for timely and entertaining conversations every day. Now, Native America Calling is counting on you. We are ending the year with a fundraising drive to keep the conversations going. And when you make a donation of any amount between now and the end of the drive, December 31st, you'll be entered to win 2 Alaska Airlines tickets as our thank you for supporting Native America Calling. Go to nativeamericacalling.com and click on the button that says Donate Today.
Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Andy Murphy. Denmark is making moves to correct historic injustices against Greenland's indigenous Inuit population as the autonomous territory pushes toward independence. Denmark forced contraception on thousands of Inuit women starting in the 1960s. The country is offering payouts to them starting in April. And the country is ending a controversial parent competency test that disproportionately harmed Inuit mothers. We'll hear about what's behind these developments right after the news.
This is National Native News. I'm Antonia Gonzalez. The Lumbee tribe is celebrating the passage of the National Defense Authorization Act, which includes legislation to grant the tribe federal recognition. The Senate passed the defense bill Wednesday as Lumbee citizens gathered in Pembroke, North Carolina for a watch party. Chairman John Lowry was in Washington for the vote and shared a short video message saying he's the last Lumbee chairman to go to D.C. to fight for full federal recognition.
Now our children and our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren can come up here working and fighting and promoting other things for our people.
The tribe has sought federal status for more than a century. The effort has faced opposition, including by the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians in North Carolina, while President Donald Trump promised the Lumbee tribe federal recognition. This December marked the 84th anniversary of the Pearl Harbor bombing, a shocking attack that drew the U.S. into World War II and unleashed a wave of anti-Japanese hysteria. While the U.S. would join a global fight against fascism and Nazi concentration camps, it was erecting camps of its own at home, forcing tens of thousands of Japanese Americans into internment. 2 of those camps were set up on tribal lands in Arizona. In the first of a 5-part series, KJZZ's Gabriel Pietrazio examines the law that has given presidents power to imprison perceived enemies.
December 7th, 1941. No American will ever forget this Sunday morning in Hawaii.
It all began with the bombing of Pearl Harbor. More than 2,400 souls were lost at the naval base on the island of Oahu. The U.S. was suddenly swept into the Pacific theater.
And we're going to fight it with everything we've got.
During FDR's Day of Infamy speech, he invoked the Alien Enemies Act. It's a 1798 wartime law authorizing the president to legally detain and deport anyone suspected of engaging in acts like espionage and sabotage.
Not only must the shame of Japanese treachery be wiped out, but the sources of international brutality, wherever they exist, must be absolutely and finally broken.
Weeks later, Roosevelt directed the Secretary of War to herd more than 120,000 people with Japanese ancestry into camps in Arizona, California, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, Idaho, and as far east as Arkansas. 2/3 of prisoners were American-born citizens. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt had empathized with them, even touring a camp south of Phoenix in 1943. Barbara Perry says Eleanor was simply ahead of her time.
And certainly on how she viewed Japanese Americans, but she couldn't convince her husband of that.
Perry is co-chair of the Presidential Oral History Program at the University of Virginia. She also points out precedent was set a century prior when President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act in 1830, marching tribes west of the Mississippi River.
America was pretty discriminatory.
Despite not being at war, President Trump re-invoked the Alien Enemies Act, on day one of his second term.
To eliminate the presence of all foreign gangs and criminal networks, bringing devastating crime to U.S. soil, including our cities and inner cities.
This proclamation wasn't surprising to John Woolley, co-director of the American Presidency Project at UC Santa Barbara.
This is a domestic political rallying point that is very powerful with Donald Trump's base.
I'm Gabriel Pietrorazio.
And I'm Antonia Gonzalez.
National Native News is produced by Kawanak Broadcast Corporation with funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Support by AARP, whose Family Caregiver Resource Guide is available to caregivers by calling 877-333-5885 or at aarp.org/caregiverresources. Support from Clarkson Potter, publisher of Turtle Island, Foods and Traditions of the Indigenous Peoples of North America by Native American chef Sean Sherman. With ancestral and modern recipes, this cookbook showcases diverse foodways of the continent's regions.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Andy Murphy. Denmark officials just announced it will compensate thousands of Indigenous women who were part of a contraception campaign against their will. It follows an official apology from the Danish government over the practice targeting the Inuit women of Greenland dating back to the 1960s. The government says it will also halt competency tests for Inuit women, a practice critics say is connected to the large percentage of Indigenous babies taken from their mothers and put into foster care. Greenland is an autonomous territory of Denmark. Its population is almost all Inuit, and there is growing momentum toward independence, partially fueled by President Donald Trump's rhetoric about taking control of the island territory. We're going to hear from Inuit Greenlanders today about its complex history and relationship with Denmark and how growing international pressure is galvanizing Inuit pride. You can join with your comments or questions by calling 1-800-996-2848. That's also 1-800-99-NATIVE. Joining us now from Nuuk, Greenland is Aki Matilda Hudam. She is a member of the Parliament of Greenland. Welcome to Native America Calling, Aki Matilda.
Thank you. I'm right now in Copenhagen, Denmark, as I'm also a member of the Danish Parliament as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining. I know it's a little bit late in the evening, but glad you're going to be part of this discussion here. And I want to ask, politically, where do the residents of Greenland stand on independence, and what would independence mean for Greenlanders?
So right off the topic, a really complex question, you can say, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important that to, of course, say that independence is broadly supported, though there are different views about it. There are different views of timing, space, and what needs to be put in place at first. For many Greenlanders, independence is not just a symbolic gesture, if you can say so. For many Greenlanders, it's a lot about responsibility, it's about dignity, it's about having the full democratic control of your own country, having the right to have your own country at place where you can take your own decisions about your bodily autonomy, your families, your language, your culture, your educational structure, your future, your resources. There's so much to it. And even of the things we're talking about right now with the forced contraception, with the colonialism we've had with Denmark, mm-hmm. There's so many of these issues that being brought up when we talk about independence, and it's such a complex discussion.
Okay. And I want to ask, how much influence does recent U.S. attention on Greenland have with the development and views of independence?
Again, a very complex question, I would say. But I think the recent attention with the United States have definitely impacted on how much the rest of the world, the international community, view Greenland first and foremost, and not necessarily about exactly how we talk about independence. I think it's very important to first and foremost talk about independence as the right to have your own country, the right to have your own identity, your dignity. But when we talk about being a part of the rest of the world, we also need to establish some sort or make sure that the established rule-based world order is at stake, because otherwise it would be really difficult for an indigenous population without our own military to be able to enforce our right to our country. That can be done with rule-based governance worldwide if we make sure that we are part of a broader international cooperation with like-minded countries like NATO, for example.
Okay. And about how long have Greenlanders been seriously talking about and planning for independence? And in 2025 or 2026, how much closer is Greenland to independence?
Good question. So we have to go through 300 years of history to get to answer your question more broadly, but I'll try to do my best. Greenland has been seriously discussing and planning independence for decades. Let's start there. Around the 1970s, Greenlandic view of talking about independence started rising up rapidly in a way that we got our own government and our own parliament in Greenland back then. Another key milestone was back in 2009, where a large majority of Greenlanders, around 75% of Greenlanders, through a referendum, made sure that we could, by law, international law, make sure that we are recognized as a people of our own, that a people that are not exclusively Danish people. And that law was stated in the United Nations, which gave us the right to become a sovereign nation at one point. This law's recognition of Greenlandic people as our own people really affirmed our rights for the future. And since then, we have really been working our way towards making sure that our population can thrive and grow and have more international and diplomatic relations with other countries to make sure that Greenland is recognized, but also making sure that we have like-minded countries that we can both trade with, but also outside of economy, of course, we want to make sure that we can be safe in a more globalized world.
Okay. And that kind of brings us into this year. You know, the Danish president or the Danish prime minister recently apologized for the forced contraception of thousands of Greenlandic women starting in the 1960s. What do you make of this apology and why it is happening now?
So for the fact of why it's happening now is probably going to be mostly due to the fact that in recent development. So let me go back a bit.
Okay.
I was elected the first time in 2019. I was elected to the Danish parliament because the Greenlandic population have the right to elect 2 members of parliament to the Danish parliament, since the Danish parliament is the only parliament where you can discuss different issues, key issues like defense, foreign policy, and other related matters for Greenland, but in Denmark. those areas of responsibilities are not covered by the Greenlandic Parliament. So in that sense, in 2019, which is 6 years ago, soon to be 7 years ago, it was even almost taboo to be able to say that Denmark once colonized Greenland. It was taboo to talk about how the Greenlandic population have suffered from the consequences of colonialism. But in those 6 years, we have moved forward in such a rapid pace that we have even convinced that the Danish Prime Minister how important it is to acknowledge some of the wrongdoings of history without taking away some of the history that they also wanted to emphasize as well, right? Mm-hmm. So this apology does not come spontaneously, you could say so. Of course, there have been studies, there have been sustained pressure from the Greenlandic people, from the Inuit women, from the Inuit families, from journalism, from researchers. Of course, also the international civil rights movements, the International Court of Justice. There was a lot of pressure filling up more and more to the Danish government that I think also would be one of the reasons we're seeing the apology today.
Okay. All right. And the Danish government also announced it would compensate thousands of women. That amounts to about $46,000 US. How is that plan being viewed by the people it affected most?
Of course, I think it's important to say that I cannot speak on behalf of those women. I think it's very important that they have their voice of their own. I think it's important that we as politicians are very humble about that. But I do think for what I've seen in media coverage, I do think for some women it is meaningful and it represents some kind of recognition and accountability. But I do think for some women that have spent decades and decades and felt like they're being ignored or dismissed, or that acknowledgement, though it can carry a really real weight, it can also be very tough to carry. For some, you cannot put a price on the loss of bodily autonomy, right? And the long-term health consequences it can have, or the emotional impact it can have for such a fundamental decision being taken away. So I think it is complex and it does vary from women to women.
All right. We are talking with Aki Matilda Hudam today. We're going to introduce some other Greenlandic women in this hour. We're talking about relationships between Greenland and Denmark today. You can join us by calling 1-800-996-2848. We'll be back after this break. Pueblo singer Ailani, Tlingit artist Yatsin, and traditional favorites Northern Cree all put out new and notable music this year. We're bringing in our music experts to look back on the year in Native music. Some you've heard and some you might have missed. That's on the next Native America Calling.
Repatriation is the return of ancestors and stolen culture. The Association on American Indian Affairs is hosting the 11th annual Repatriation Conference, Feeding the Fire, Advancing the Movement, in February 2026. This fully virtual conference will offer small group interactive workshops, strategies, networking, and more to advance domestic and international repatriation. More at indian-affairs.org. The association supports this show.
Thank you for tuning in today to Native America Calling. I'm Andy Murphy. The territory of Greenland, which has a majority indigenous Inuit population, is making strides toward independence from Denmark. The push is spurring actions by Denmark to address its problematic treatment of indigenous people. If you have questions or comments, you can join us by calling 1-800-996-2848. That's also 1-800-99-NATIVE. I want to bring in another guest. We have Uyeme Inge from Nuuk, Greenland. She's the museum director for the Nuuk Local Museum. Welcome to Native America Calling, Uyeme.
Thank you.
So, more on the relationship between Greenlanders and Danish people. What has that relationship been like, and how has that relationship changed over time?
You're really good at asking some very broad questions. I think it's a very complicated question because our history dates back like 300 years. And obviously, there's always been sort of a discrepancy between where the power laid between the Danish and Greenlandic people. I think the one place where the history between Denmark and Greenland really stands out is that it's really it has always developed in a very complex way that sort of sets us apart from other colonial historical relationships in the rest of the world. Hold on. I think it still affects us today, even though we've developed quite a bit, as Matilda also sort of came into. But I think it's too broad of a question to answer just in one take, because it would take me about a year to sort of get all through. So maybe you can.
Yeah. Well, how about recently? How have you seen President Trump's rhetoric and actions related to Greenland affect the attitudes of visitors and people that you might meet at the museum?
I think that this year has been crazy. This year has been very, very, very interesting to experience as a historian and as a person who works with tourism on an everyday basis. It's very clear that President Trump's way of sort of putting us on the spotlight has moved a lot of things, not only on a political level, but also on a personal level. This year, we've been flooded with guests from all over the world, but also specifically from the States, who are very interested in hearing our opinions on all sorts of matters and sort of how they could buy their way into our culture and our area, pretty much. So, and that's been a very interesting experience. Historically, Greenland has never been this much in the spotlight ever before. So it was a very wild experience for sure.
Right. And just mentioning that Greenland hasn't had this much of a bright spotlight in such a long time, what are some of the most important things folks should know about Greenlanders, about the indigenous people there?
Oh my God. I obviously cannot talk on behalf of every single person in our country, but I can say that we are a country that are very rooted in our culture. We are very humble. I think one of the things that keep coming up, and it's a very practical thing during this summer and this year, is that we tend to come off quiet. We're allowed people within our own space. We talk and we communicate, but we communicate differently than Americans and Canadians and Danish people for sure. We come off more quiet because we don't raise our voices, and it's a practical thing, but it can sometimes come off as meek or as inverted, but it really isn't that. It's a question of cultural difference.
Okay. All right, I want to go back to Aki Matilda Hudam. She's a member of the Parliament of Greenland. Aki Matilda, I want to ask about identity and, this movement toward independence. I mean, what sort of things are Greenlanders talking about when it comes to independence and what it means for identity?
So I think it's important to first and foremost say, just like Liam Mingwa just said, that it's important that acknowledge a lot of Greenlanders have different views and perspectives. So I'll do my best to try to generalize some of this, but hear this with some sort of discrepancy, if you can say so. I think for many, independence really is about being able to live your life as an indigenous Inuk in the modern day of life as our world is today, without constantly having to measure ourselves to Danish norms. I think that also includes our language. I think it includes our family life, our child rearing, our education, even how we define what is successful, what is well-being, how we conduct ourselves in our society. So policies like the ones we're talking about right now about forced contraception, for example, or culturally biased parental test, they aren't just political decisions, but they also send a clear message about whose life and way of living is considered valid in a way. And I think that's one of the reasons a lot of people around the world really fight for having that kind of political democratic independence in one way or another, because we're fighting for our right to exist in the culture that we're brought up in, right? And it's also a strong focus on identity because the Inuit culture, the Inuit way of living in the whole world haven't gotten our own place where we can thrive as a nation. And we're really trying to develop that. But again, at the same time, I think it's important to acknowledge that this have a number of layers, which is both about identity, economy, geopolitical stance, so much more behind it. So it's a very complex question, and I'm trying my best to answer it. So it really, in short term, I do believe it's about dignity and identity, and redefining ourselves in our own terms.
All right. Thank you so much for that. I know it is, these are broad questions, and, it's been a little difficult on this side to write questions about, independence, identity, and colonization, because we realize on this side also as Native people that there are so many different variations of all of these really big topics. What independence, what sovereignty means for one person in a particular sector of the community means so much different. It means a whole other animal to another person who's working in a different part of the country, in a different state. On this side, it's we get it about all these various meanings of different parts of society, about different parts of being indigenous. And I want to go back to you, Oyeme. I want to ask about, what is there a movement like here in the United States? Is there a movement for of cultural revitalization, of strengthening cultural ties?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think we can somewhat safely say that about hold on. Yeah, about 10 years ago or a little less than that, we definitely started seeing the revival or the redefinition of Inuit cultural practices that they hadn't been forgotten per se, but they hadn't been in use for a while. We start seeing people. One of the most obvious ways to see it is the revival or the reimagining of our tattooing traditions, our kakionnerit, which are becoming not just popular but very like everyday use now. We're also seeing people exploring a different path to the Christian one. So sort of like more like a spiritual thing, which is all rooted in our original culture. And I find that to be extremely exciting because it does go back and sort of started rediscussing, just as Agimatilda just brought up, the way that we define ourselves, our success criteria, but also just going in and asking questions about our everyday lives and the way that our society is functioning around us. And I think that's extremely interesting.
All right, what's behind this revival of cultural practices and cultural pride?
I think we all just needed to go back to something, although it's mostly intangible. It does become somewhat tangible when you're practicing those old traditions. They become a part of, or they sort of underline. I'm trying to find a way to phrase this, because the intangible part of it is extremely delicate, but also very undefinable. I think what I'm trying to say is that it makes us feel more valid on an everyday basis, if that makes any sense at all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I want to bring in another guest. Joining us from also Nuuk in Greenland is Naingwak Higulon. She is the chair of Sila 360, which is a legal advocacy group for Greenlanders. Welcome to Native America Calling, Naingwak.
Thank you.
All right, and in the beginning of the show, we mentioned that the Danish government stopped giving Greenlandic women competency tests, and I want to go over to focusing on this issue, even though these competency tests are given to Inuit women in Denmark. First, what is this test? It's FKU.
To explain it shortly, it's short for parental competency tests, which consist of several psychometric testing tools to measure if a person has personality disorders. They measure, for example, IQs, if they have psychopathic traits, lack of empathy, and so on. But these tools are developed and adapted to a Danish linguistic and cultural context when used on Greenlandic parents in Denmark.
All right.
And that answers your question.
Mm-hmm. How do these tests or FKUs lead to a disproportionate number of Greenlandic children being taken away from their mothers?
Because the test, as I mentioned, is culturally and linguistically adapted to a Danish population. It hasn't been validated in the Greenlandic population. So of course, if your first language is Greenlandic and your second language is Danish and you're tested in Danish, of course this will lead to some it could lead to some wrong results from the testing. And to give an example, I don't think that any Danes living in Greenland who has Danish children and has a Danish culture and Danish as their first language would be very happy with, being tested in Greenlandic. So in this way, it could lead to, misinterpretations of misinterpretations of the parents, but also wrongful placement of Greenlandic children, and therefore a disproportionate high amount of placed children in foster care in Denmark.
All right. Do you see this as a continuation of the colonial practices that Denmark had put in place, 300 years ago?
Yes, I think it definitely is a reproduction of coloniality or colonialism. If we look at back in 1951, 22 children were sent to Denmark to become Little Dane. It's known as the Little Dane experiment or the social experiment, where the Danish government initiated an experiment to take 22 Greenlandic children to Denmark to adapt and learn the Danish language and culture and how to be a proper Danish citizen. They were supposed to return to Greenland and be the elite who should teach the rest of the population how to be civilized, if you could put it that way. So I definitely think that the way they're using those tools, they're measuring them from an ethnocentric Danish perspective. So in that way, I think you could say that it's a reproduction of colonialism and colonial practices.
Okay. All right. That might sound familiar to our listeners here in the United States. If you have a question or comment for us today about our topic, you can give us a call at 1-800-996-2848. That's also 1-800-99-NATIVE. We'll be back after this break.
The Indian Arts and Crafts Board promotes Indian artists of federally recognized tribes through its online source directory. Information on this no-charge opportunity available at doi.gov/IACB, who support this program.
Need an actionable plan to achieve your goals? Kaufman & Associates strengthens Native organizations through culturally grounded strategic planning. More at kaufmaninc.com, KAUFFMANINC.com.
You have attuned to Native America Calling. I'm Andy Murphy, sitting in for Sean Spruce, and we're talking with Greenlandic people about Denmark's recent actions toward reconciliation with the mostly Inuit population. The relationship has parallels with the colonial history of North America. And you can join us by calling 1-800-996-2848 with your comments or questions. That's also 1-800-99-NATIVE. I want to go back to our guest, Naingwook Higolon. She is the chair of SILA 360, which is a legal advocacy group for Greenlanders. Naingwook, in just this year, the tests are no longer given to Greenlandic mothers in Denmark. Have there been any efforts to reunite children with their mothers?
As far as we can see now, they have only received the special unit who were supposed to have expertise in Greenlandic culture and language have only received 21 cases so far, and none of the re-evaluation of the cases has led to any children being returned to their families. So I think we're just back to square one at the moment. And yeah, okay. I can remember the rest of your question.
No, that was good. I want to also bring in another guest. Nyangwook, you introduced me to a Greenlandic mother that Sila 360 has been working with and advocating for. I want to bring in Johanne Geisler. She's in Denmark currently right now. She's a mother. Welcome to Native America Calling, Johanne.
Hi.
Hi, thank you for joining. So, you were given two of these parental competency tests in the past. Do you remember what kind of questions were in these tests that you took?
Yeah, to correct you, I have taken 3 tests.
Oh, okay.
I can't remember the first one's test questions, but recent ones I can remember it. It was a question about what is the opposite of sun, and I answered, of course, it's moon. And the psychologist, he said to me, "No, you were wrong." And I questioned her, why do you mean by that? And she said, yeah, the opposite of sun is rain. And I was saying, no, in our culture, the opposite of sun is the moon. If you mean the rain, opposite of it is the sunshine. And she was a bit, how do you say it, irritated on me. And she moved on, and I had to, answer almost 20 questions about what is the opposite of what.
Okay.
And one of the questions she gave me was a 50 questions paper about how much I am abusing at home. One of the questions are, how does your family feel about you are abusing alcohol while I was pregnant? I needed to go into her and say to her, I'm not abuser. I don't use alcohol or narcotics. She said to me, in the records, it's in the records, it's written that you are abuser of alcohol and drugs. And I said to her, no, I don't.
Okay.
But you need to answer those 50 questions. I had no choice by answering, I do not use alcohol, I do not use narcotics. So I had no chance.
Yeah, I can imagine that. There's a lot of feelings that would come up from, being given a test like that, where, it seems like the test and the answers are completely not understanding of you or where you come from. I want to issue a little bit of a warning to our listeners. Johanna might use a term that could be considered offensive. She's just relaying what she was told. Johanna, what were the results of those tests?
Can I have the question again?
Yeah, what were the results of the tests, the FKUs you were given?
The very first one said I was second degree retard. And the other 2 results were the low end of the normal conclusion.
Yeah, and what did that make you feel like to get those results?
The very first one, I questioned it very much because I am not second degree retard, but the other ones make me feel like no, I'm not that. I'm I'm not. How do I say it? I don't feel like I'm a bit abnormal, should I say?
Mhm. And because of those results, your children were taken away from you. What was that like to be told that you're no longer mentally fit to be a mother?
Of course, I told them I'm a mother. You can't take my children. No, that's not true. And it was hard. And yeah.
Yeah. But you were also reunited with at least your eldest child, your daughter. What was that like, getting to know her all over again?
When she lived with me from day one after birth until she was 6 years old, 10 years after coming home, she, I feel like I got my baby back. Because I felt happy, of course, and
okay. And
it was
mhm.
a couple of months after my son was taken and she got home. It was mixed feelings.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel now that the Danish government has stopped giving these kinds of tests to other Greenlandic women?
I feel like we need to do more because I feel happy that FKU tests are stopped, but we need to do more because when the FKU tests stopped, it means me and my children are protected. But my grandchildren will be removed from home, or my great grandchildren could be taken away because FKU test stops. Yeah, but he had some how do you say it, explanation in little words that it will only be to me and my children.
Mm. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for these words here and sharing your story with us. I want to go back to Nayangwuk Higulon from Sila 360. Nayangwuk, can you maybe explain a little bit more about, what further work needs to be done for Greenlandic women in Denmark?
Sure. As Johan also said, the FKU is just one part of the tests, and our organization has gone through the case files, and we see a lot of undocumented claims about alcoholism, abuse, neglecting childhood, from the parents, that the claims about the parents were neglected in the childhood without any documentation of this. For example, also I know Johan's case from start to the end, and we don't see any documentation that Johan at any point in her life should be an alcoholic. She did state that she might drink a little. At some point in her life, she did drink a little too much in the weekends, but it was only at a weekend level, and she had care for her children at that point. So I think the FKU is just one problem, but what we see in those cases are that there's a lot of assumptions and descriptions of the parents, which corresponds to the stereotypical classic prejudices there is about Greenlanders, about social problems, alcohol abuse, abuse of children, and so on. So that's just one part of the problem with the FKU. But the problem with this, the new law that banned the use of FKU tests from the 1st of May, is that it only that cases that are supposed to be reevaluated is only open cases. And for example, Johan's youngest son was forcibly adopted, so that's a closed case. This means that her case regarding her youngest son who was forcibly adopted will not be sent for reevaluation. So her case in Denmark is closed, so there's no way of her to make any complaints about the use of the FKU test, the parental competency test. Although this, in Johan's case, the FKU test was really the reason to why her son was forcibly adopted. So I think we need to look at both the closed cases and the open cases. And as we saw in there's a BBC documentary where the Danish social minister says that they can't undo forced adoptions, but we have seen that it is possible, and they just had a verdict about undoing a forced adoption. So it is possible. So we do have hope that we can take Johan's case to court again. But what it is about Johan's case is that when they decided that they wanted to adopt her child away, they should make it probable that Johan is not able to, in the future, to become a good parent. And that's essentially guessing on whether she can develop her parental skills or not. It's not facts or anything. And in addition to this, it is based on culturally sensitive tests, which are biased towards a Danish and norm and culture and ways of living and values, and also in her second language. And what I can also see from her first FKU test is that her IQ is in the range of mentally second degree retarded. And after 10 years, she gets the third test, and we see that her IQ moves up to a range of 96. And I can see that her verbal score is very low in the first, and in the latter test she had in 2019, it has improved. So I also think that there's linguistic barriers that Johan might have misunderstood some questions because Danish is not her first language and the test was conducted in Danish. So although Greenlanders have a very strong Greenlandic language, 80% of the population approximately talks Greenlandic, it also creates barriers to, for example, justice.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are coming to the end of the hour here, and I want to go back to our guest who is in Denmark right now. We have Aki-Matilda Hudam. Aki-Matilda, in addition to the apology just given this year and the halting of these tests, could there be more actions by the Danish government?
I think absolutely there should. Let's start there. Of course, there should be further actions. We have seen right now there have been a lot of acknowledgement and apologies, and the decision to make the use of these parental tests illegal is an important step. But just like Nengwar said, there are not enough in their own, right? So one of the central problems that we face right now in these matters is exactly how Naingwald described it, the limitations for these open cases only. That means that these families whose children were forcibly adopted or forcibly removed in a way without based on biased assessments are absolutely left with no real justice whatsoever, no way to review if these cases were actually factual. It is a practice that is acknowledged to be harmful. It is a practice that is acknowledged to be discriminatory. And this is one of the reasons that this law of not being able to use these tests on Greenlandic people came about. So it is reasonable to say that, of course, there should be more done by the government. There should be consequences.
Support by the American Indian College Fund. The American Indian College Fund provides millions of dollars of scholarships to thousands of Native students every year. Tribal citizens of every age and experience are eligible. The deadline for applications is May 31st, and you can find everything you need to apply at collegefund.org. That's collegefund.org or by phone at 800-766-FUND. Education is the answer. Every family caregiver could use help finding the necessary resources to care for their loved one. The AARP Family Caregiver Resource Guide helps family caregivers access key programs, services, and agencies in their communities. A copy of the guide is available by calling 877-333-5885 or online at aarp.org/caregiver-resources. AARP supports this show.
Native America Calling is produced in the Annenberg National Native Voice Studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico by Quantic Broadcast Corporation, a Native nonprofit media organization. Funding is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with support from the Public Radio Satellite Service. Music is by Brent Michael Davids. Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.